At 4 in the morning, I watched my husband's sister creep into the dark living room and steal a credit card right out of my purse. By sunrise, $25,000 had completely vanished. When my father-in-law fiercely defended her actions, I simply smiled, because the card she decided to use actually belonged to the federal government. My name is Alyssa, 32 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever let a toxic person dig their own grave. Visiting my husband's family for the holidays was always an exercise in extreme patience and silent endurance. My husband Brandon and I had been banished to the lumpy sleeper sofa in the den, a clear message about where we stood in the family hierarchy. The guest bedroom upstairs was entirely occupied by his older sister Stephanie and her endless collection of luxury luggage. The air in the house was incredibly thick with the suffocating tension that always accompanied our visits. Thomas, my father-in-law, ruled the home with an iron fist and a bloated ego, while Diane, my mother-in-law, orchestrated every interaction to ensure Stephanie remained the center of the universe. Brandon always slept heavily through these visits, oblivious to the subtle insults and the financial bleeding his family subjected us to. I, however, rarely slept well here. The springs of the old mattress pressed into my back, mirroring the sharp edges of this family's dynamics. I lay there in the pitch-black room, listening to the rhythmic breathing of my husband beside me. The house was dead quiet, save for the occasional settling of the floorboards and the low hum of the central heating unit kicking on to fight off the freezing winter air outside. I kept my eyes closed, but my mind was racing with the calculations of my daily life. In my profession, I track missing money. I follow the paper trails that corrupt executives and tax evaders try to bury. But I never imagined my professional expertise would intersect so violently with my personal life. The night before had been particularly unbearable. Stephanie had spent dinner bragging about her upcoming vacations and designer purchases while simultaneously complaining about how expensive life was for a mother. Thomas had nodded approvingly at her spending, subtly jabbing at my choice to work long hours instead of providing him with grandchildren. Brandon had just stared at his plate, refusing to defend our life choices. They saw me merely as a bank account and outsider who worked too much. They had no idea about the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Right around 4 in the morning, a subtle creak from the hallway stairs pulled me sharply out of my light doze. My training had made me a naturally light sleeper, always highly aware of my surroundings. I did not move a single muscle. I kept my breathing slow and steady, perfectly matching Brandon's rhythm. Another creak followed closer this time. Soft, deliberate footsteps moved across the hardwood floor of the adjoining hallway. Someone was trying very hard to be quiet. A sliver of pale moonlight filtered through the heavy living room curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air. The shadow of a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Stephanie. She was wearing expensive silk pajamas, her hair perfectly wrapped. She paused, scanning the room to ensure we were both fully asleep. Her gaze locked onto the armchair situated just a few feet from my side of the pull-out bed. Resting on that chair was my purse. It was a classic designer bag, a hard-earned reward to myself for closing a major federal audit last year. Stephanie had been eyeing it with unabashed envy since the moment I carried it through their front door. I watched through my eyelashes, barely leaving a slit open as she tiptoed across the Persian rug. Her movements were practiced, lacking any of the hesitation you would expect from someone about to commit a crime in their parents' home. This was clearly not her first time doing something like this. She knelt beside the chair, her breathing shallow. The faint scent of her overpowering floral perfume drifted over to me, making my nose itch, but I remained perfectly still. With agonizing slowness, Stephanie unclasped the hardware on my bag. She slipped her manicured hand inside, bypassing my makeup bag and keys, going straight for my designer wallet. I watched her pull it out. She carefully unzipped it and used 2 fingers to extract a sleek, heavy black card from the primary slot. It was not my personal platinum card. It was not the joint credit card I shared with Brandon. Stephanie held the card up to catch the moonlight, confirming the high credit limit style she was accustomed to stealing. A satisfied, greedy smile spread across her face. She slipped the card directly into the pocket of her silk pajama pants. She placed my wallet back exactly where she found it, fastened the clasp of my purse, and silently stood up. As she crept back out of the living room and up the stairs, I did not scream. I did not jump out of bed to confront her. I did not shake my husband awake to show him what his golden child sister was truly capable of doing in the middle of the night. Instead, I lay there in the quiet darkness and let a slow, chilling smirk stretch across my face. Stephanie thought she had just scored an easy payday. She thought she was untouchable in this house. But she had no idea that she had just swallowed a razor blade wrapped in a very expensive piece of plastic. The trap was set, and I was going to enjoy watching her trigger the loud explosion. The morning sunlight pierced through the thin blinds of the den, signaling the start of a day that would shatter this family forever. I stretched on the sleeper sofa, feeling a dull ache. Brandon was already up, seeking his mother's morning coffee. I reached for my phone resting on the side table. The digital clock displayed exactly 8 in the morning. As soon as I unlocked the screen, a rapid succession of automated alerts began flooding my notification center. They popped up in a relentless cascade of financial hemorrhage. The bank was desperately trying to notify the cardholder of highly unusual activity. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders, reading the text messages. The first alert detailed a massive transaction processed just hours ago for $10,000 at Disney Cruise Line. Stephanie was clearly planning a lavish vacation for her children and herself on my dime. The next alert showed a charge for $8,000 at a flagship Chanel boutique. She had probably purchased that quilted handbag she had been admiring during dinner last night. The final alert was a charge for $7,000 at Gucci. She had managed to drain exactly $25,000 in a span of barely 3 hours. She moved from online travel bookings to designer purchases with the efficiency of a criminal. I stared at the glowing screen, feeling a cold sense of absolute validation. I did not feel panic or anger. I felt the pure, unadulterated thrill of a trap successfully springing shut on a predator. The sheer audacity required to steal from a guest in your own home while they slept was staggering. Yet Stephanie possessed an entitlement so deep it defied all basic human decency. She genuinely believed she deserved whatever she wanted simply because she existed. I swung my legs over the pull-out bed and placed my feet on the floor. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my heart rate. Today required absolute precision. I could not afford to let emotion cloud my judgment. I gathered my clothes and quietly slipped into the adjacent guest bathroom. I took my time showering, letting the hot water wash away the physical discomfort of the night. I dressed in a sharp, tailored outfit, selecting a crisp white blouse and dark slacks. I wanted to look professional and unyielding. I applied my makeup, ensuring my expression remained composed. I was no longer just a tired daughter-in-law visiting for the holidays. I was a financial auditor walking into a hostile environment, armed with indisputable evidence of a federal crime. I slipped my phone into my pocket, feeling its heavy weight against my hip. The device held the key to dismantling the arrogant facade this family hid behind. I opened the bathroom door and stepped out into the hallway, ready to face them. The smell of freshly brewed espresso and sizzling bacon wafted up the stairs. I walked down the steps with deliberate, slow pacing. The ambient noise of the household grew louder as I approached the kitchen area. I could hear the clinking of silverware against expensive porcelain plates and the murmurs of casual morning conversation. Diane was humming a cheerful tune, clearly delighted to have her golden child under her roof. I rounded the corner and stepped into the formal dining room. The scene was perfectly domestic. Thomas sat at the head of the long glass dining table, reading a financial newspaper on his tablet. He wore a crisp polo shirt projecting suburban wealth and authority. Diane fluttered around the kitchen island, pouring fresh orange juice into crystal glasses. Brandon sat near his father, staring blankly into his coffee mug, looking exhausted. And then there was Stephanie. She sat opposite Brandon, looking remarkably well-rested for someone who had been committing grand larceny at 4 in the morning. She wore a plush cashmere robe and smiled sweetly as she buttered a piece of artisan toast. She looked up when I entered the room, and her smile widened into a picture of perfect innocence. "Good morning, Alyssa," she chimed, her voice syrupy and bright. I hope you managed to get some sleep on that old sofa. I did not return her smile. I did not offer a polite morning greeting. I simply walked toward the table, my eyes locked dead on her face. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as my silence stretched on. Diane stopped pouring juice, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and confusion. Thomas lowered his tablet, annoyed by the sudden interruption to his morning routine. I stopped right next to Brandon. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen to ensure it was unlocked and the banking alerts were fully visible. The bright red text of the fraud warnings stood out starkly against the white background. I held the phone over the center of the heavy glass table. I did not yell. I did not accuse anyone. I simply let the phone drop from my fingers. It hit the thick glass surface with a sharp, loud smack that echoed through the sudden silence of the dining room. The expensive electronic device slowly slid to a complete stop directly in front of my husband. Brandon actually jumped slightly at the sudden noise. He frowned deeply, looking down at the illuminated screen. His eyes scanned the notifications, reading the massive dollar amounts and the luxury vendor names. I watched the blood drain completely from his face, leaving him pale and terrified. The reality of those numbers hit him like a physical blow. $25,000 stolen in the dead of night. His breath hitched in his throat. He did not look at me. He did not look at his father or his mother. The silence in the dining room became suffocating as the seconds slowly ticked by. Brandon slowly raised his head and locked his wide, terrified eyes onto his sister. Stephanie blinked back at him, adjusting the collar of her plush cashmere robe with nonchalance. She sipped her orange juice as if she had not just committed a massive financial crime. The suffocating silence stretched until Thomas slammed his expensive tablet face down on the glass table. "What is going on here?" Thomas demanded, his booming voice echoing off the ceiling. He glared at Brandon with intense irritation. "Why are you staring at your sister, and why did your wife throw her phone at you?" Brandon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked from the screen to his father and back again. His hands shook violently. He pushed the phone toward the center of the table. Alyssa, Brandon stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake. Tell me your phone was hacked or identity stolen." "It is not a mistake, Brandon," I replied, my voice cold. "Your sister crept into the den at 4 this morning. She took a credit card from my purse and spent $25,000 on vacations and handbags before sunrise." Diane gasped, dropping a silver spoon. She rushed to stand behind Stephanie, placing protective hands on her. "That is an outrageous accusation," Diane shrieked, glaring with fury. "Stephanie would never do such a thing. You are clearly confused or trying to ruin our holiday." Thomas did not gasp or even yell. He slowly picked up his espresso cup, taking a measured sip. He looked at the phone, then at me with an expression of supreme arrogance. He set the cup down with a sharp clink. "Let us not lose our heads over a simple misunderstanding," Thomas stated. He waved his hand in my direction. "Stephanie would never steal. That is completely absurd. You left your purse out in the open, Alyssa. You were careless. She probably just saw a black card and thought it was the family expense card I give her for emergencies." I stared at my father-in-law, marveling at the sheer audacity of his mental gymnastics. The family expense card. The level of delusion required to justify a $25,000 theft as a simple mix-up was staggering. Stephanie seized the lifeline her father threw her. Her lower lip began to tremble on cue. Fake tears welled up in her wide eyes. "I am so sorry," she sniffled, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "I was just trying to book a trip for the kids and pick up holiday gifts. I grabbed the wrong card from the counter. I thought it was Dad's emergency account. You know I would never intentionally take anything belonging to you, Alyssa. You are being incredibly cruel." Diane wrapped her arms around Stephanie, soothing her golden child. "See?" Diane glared at me with triumph. "It was just a harmless mistake. You left your personal things scattered around and caused all this unnecessary panic. You should apologize to Stephanie for calling her a thief." My husband, the man who promised to defend me against all harm, turned his body toward me. The panic in his eyes was replaced by a desperate, pleading look. He was slipping right back into his lifelong role as the family peacekeeper who absorbed their toxicity to keep his father happy. "Alyssa, please," Brandon whispered, leaning close to me so his parents would not hear. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip frantic and sweaty. "Keep your voice down. Do not make this a bigger deal than it has to be. You are going to give my dad a heart attack and ruin this whole trip for everyone." I looked down at his shaking hand gripping my arm. I felt a massive wave of suffocating disgust wash over me. "Let go of me right now," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Brandon quickly dropped his hand, but he did not stop his begging. "Look, it's just money," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can fix this quietly. I will pull $25,000 from our joint house fund to pay you back. We have the savings ready. I will wire the money to your checking account now, and we can forget this morning ever happened. Please, Alyssa, just let it go for my sake." He wanted to drain the savings we had built over 5 years. The money meant for our future home, the money I had worked 80-hour weeks to save. He wanted to hand it over to cover his sister's criminal shopping spree, all to protect his father's fragile ego and his sister's fake innocence. I was willing to sacrifice our entire financial future simply to maintain the toxic illusion of his flawless family. I looked slowly around the dining table. Diane was glaring at me with pure hatred. Stephanie was hiding a smug smile behind her coffee mug, knowing her younger brother was bailing her out again. Thomas was already picking up his tablet, ready to return to his financial news, believing the crisis was completely resolved by his generous son. They all thought they had won. They thought they had successfully gaslit me into total submission. They genuinely believed I was just a quiet, obedient wife who would silently swallow this betrayal to keep her marriage intact. I felt a dark laugh bubbling up deep in my chest. It started small, a low vibration that quickly grew into something terrifying. I threw my head back and laughed out loud at them. It was a chilling, humorless sound that echoed loudly through the dining room, slicing through their comfortable suburban arrogance. The sound of my laughter made Thomas drop his tablet again. Diane stopped glaring and stepped back fearfully. Stephanie's smug smile vanished instantly. Brandon looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "You cannot ever pay this massive amount back." "Brandon," I finally said. I leaned heavily over the thick glass surface of the dining table, locking my eyes with my husband. He stared back at me with absolute confusion radiating from his pale face. He genuinely thought money could simply wash away the blatant criminality we had just witnessed. "You cannot solve this problem by draining our joint savings account." "Brandon," I told him, my voice ringing with a terrifying clarity. "Your little plan to wire money into my checking account is completely useless right now. Do you honestly think I care about the cash value of what your sister just stole today? Do you think I am standing here causing a scene over a few luxury handbags and some cruise tickets?" My laugh echoed through the room again, harsh and biting. I watched as Diane pulled Stephanie closer to her chest, as if my words were physical weapons striking them. Thomas gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white under the pressure. The arrogant facade he had worn just moments ago was beginning to crack. I turned my attention away from my pathetic husband and focused directly on my father-in-law, taking a deliberate step toward him right now. "Thomas, you run a very lucrative import and export business," I said. "You command dozens of employees and handle international shipping manifests every single day. You consider yourself a titan of industry, a man who knows exactly how the financial world operates. So tell me, Thomas, how does a man of your profound business intellect not recognize the severe danger standing right inside his own house?" Thomas narrowed his eyes at me, his jaw clenching tight. He opened his mouth to issue another dismissive command, but I cut him off instantly by slamming my hands on the thick glass tabletop. I leaned in so close I could smell the bitter espresso on his breath. "I did not leave my personal credit card sitting out on a chair for your daughter to mistakenly grab," I stated emphatically, enunciating every single syllable. "That sleek black piece of plastic your golden child pocketed in the dark was not mine. It was never mine." Stephanie gasped loudly from across the room. Her hands flew to her mouth and the smug safety she had felt just minutes ago completely evaporated. "If it was not your card, then whose money did I just spend?" she stammered. Her voice trembled with sudden dread. I ignored her entirely, keeping my intense gaze locked onto Thomas. You hired an independent auditing firm 3 months ago to review your corporate accounts. Thomas, I continued. Your company was flagged for suspicious offshore wire transfers and discrepancies in your quarterly tax filings. You needed a forensic accountant to clean up your messy books before the government decided to audit you directly. You brought me in because you thought hiring your daughter-in-law would give you leverage. You thought family loyalty would make me overlook the glaring red flags hiding right there. The color rapidly drained from Thomas's face. The realization of what I was saying began to settle heavily onto his shoulders. He swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. You gave me full independent oversight of your primary corporate expense accounts. I told him, stepping back from the table and smoothing the front of my white blouse. As the legally mandated forensic auditor, acting on behalf of your corporate board, I was required to hold the highest tier access card tied directly to your primary business equity. That card is registered directly to your own company name, Thomas. It is bound to your corporate tax identification number. It is not an emergency family fund. It is a highly restricted corporate asset. Brandon let out a strangled groan, dropping his head into his hands. Diane looked frantically between her husband and her daughter, desperately trying to understand the catastrophic implications of my words. But it is just a credit card, Diane protested, her voice shrill and panicked. We can just cancel it. We can pay the bill. We can tell the bank it was a simple misunderstanding. It is just shopping. You cannot cancel this. Diane, I replied calmly. Turning my freezing gaze toward her, I continued speaking. You cannot simply pay the bill and sweep this under the rug. That card is actively monitored by the Internal Revenue Service due to the ongoing forensic audit. Every single transaction processed on that specific piece of plastic is logged, verified, and scrutinized by federal financial regulators. Stephanie began to hyperventilate. She clutched her cashmere robe tightly against her chest, her manicured nails digging into the soft fabric. You let me take it, she cried out, pointing an accusing finger at me. You set me up, Alyssa. You all knew it. I did not force your hand into my purse, Stephanie, I retorted sharply. I did not force you to march into designer boutiques the moment they opened their doors this morning and swipe a card that did not belong to you. You made those choices completely on your own, with the entitled arrogance this family has nurtured in you for 36 years. Instead, you robbed your own father's heavily monitored corporate entity. The security protocols on that specific corporate card are incredibly strict. Thomas, I explained, my voice lowering into a deadly calm tone. Standard protections do not apply. The system is designed to immediately catch corporate embezzlement and money laundering. Thomas tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He gripped his chest, a look of pure terror taking over his features. The silence in the dining room was absolute, shattered only by Stephanie's frantic sobbing. Brandon reached out toward me, his hand trembling violently in the air. What happens now? He begged, tears streaming down his face. The protocol is automatic, Brandon, I said clearly. Any unverified transaction over $10,000 automatically bypasses the standard banking security team. It directly triggers a mandatory federal fraud alert. The final word hung in the air like a heavy guillotine blade waiting to drop. The sheer magnitude of the situation finally breached thick walls of denial from Thomas. The color rushed violently back into his face, painting his cheeks a dangerous mottled red. He stood up with such explosive force that his heavy wooden chair scraped harshly against the floorboards, tipping backward and crashing onto the expensive rug. His hand spasmed around his delicate porcelain espresso cup. The fragile ceramic could not withstand his sudden crushing grip. It shattered loudly in his fist, sending hot dark liquid flying everywhere. Jagged white shards exploded across the pristine glass dining table. The dark coffee splattered onto his crisp polo shirt and across the financial documents scattered near his tablet, but he did not even flinch. He ignored the hot liquid dripping from his fingers and pointed a shaking, blood-stained hand directly at my face. You will fix this right now, Thomas roared, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, desperate rage. You are going to pick up that phone and call the corporate banking liaison immediately, Alyssa. You will tell them this entire nightmare was nothing but a simple clerical error today. You will say the card was misplaced during a family gathering, and a relative used it by accident, believing it was a personal account. You will make up whatever lie you have to make up to get those federal agents off my business back and keep my daughter out of a federal prison cell. Do you hear me? You will shut this down today. I did not step back. I did not shrink under his commanding tone the way Brandon and Diane always did. I simply crossed my arms over my chest, locking my knees firmly into their tight place. I stood my ground. I stared directly into the eyes of the man who had treated me like disposable trash for years. I am afraid that is completely impossible, Thomas. I replied, my tone steady and completely devoid of any sympathy. You clearly do not understand how federal auditing software functions. I cannot just call a customer service representative and sweet-talk them into erasing a massive felony. The security system automatically locked the account exactly at 7 in the morning, the moment the spending threshold was breached across 3 different luxury merchant categories by your beloved daughter Stephanie today. The automated report was already generated, compiled, and securely transmitted. I paused, letting the harsh reality sink into his arrogant mind. It is already in the hands of the authorities. The fraud alert has been officially registered with the federal database. Diane let out a piercing wail and dropped to her knees beside the heavy chair. She clutched her golden child tightly, sobbing wildly into the cashmere robe. Stephanie was hyperventilating now, her breath coming in short, rapid gasps that bordered on a full panic attack. She grabbed her own hair, pulling at the perfectly styled blonde strands again today. "I cannot go to jail!" Stephanie shrieked, her voice cracking with pure terror. "I am a mother. I have children. I cannot wear a prison uniform. Brandon, do something. Tell your wife to fix this right now. Tell her to call her bosses or the police or whoever she needs to call." Brandon remained completely frozen in his chair. He looked like a man watching a train derail in slow motion, entirely powerless to stop the impending carnage. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic squeaking sound escaped his dry throat, showing his complete uselessness right now. He looked at me with begging eyes, hoping I would miraculously pull a solution out of thin air to save his family from the consequences of their own actions. I offered him absolutely nothing. This was the bed they had made, and now they had to lie in it. Thomas slammed his uninjured hand onto the table, causing the remaining glassware to rattle dangerously. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," he snarled, taking a menacing step toward me. "I pay your auditing firm a massive retainer. I am your client. You work for me and my big business today. If you do not pick up that phone and call off the feds right this second, I will dedicate the rest of my life to destroying your career. I will drag your name through the mud. I will make sure you lose your license. You will never work in the financial sector again. I will crush you, Alyssa." His threats washed over me like a light breeze. I uncrossed my arms and offered him a tight, mocking smile. "You are threatening to destroy my career while you are standing on the precipice of a federal money laundering investigation right now." I stated this fact while shaking my head in mock disappointment. "That is a fascinating strategy. You no longer have the power to destroy anyone. By the end of this week, you will be lucky if you can even afford a decent defense attorney." The fraud alert does not just highlight the stolen $25,000. It highlights the exact corporate account the money was drawn from. It shines a massive federal spotlight on the exact offshore accounts you have been desperately trying to hide from the government. Stephanie did not just steal a fancy vacation trip from me. She handed the authorities the exact roadmap they needed to dismantle your entire empire. Diane wailed louder, burying her face in her hands. The pristine suburban illusion she had maintained for decades was turning to ash all around her. Stephanie began to rock back and forth in her chair, muttering frantically about how unfair everything was. The dining room had transformed into a chamber of pure chaotic panic. Every single member of this toxic family was suddenly facing the catastrophic collapse of their privileged world. Then a sharp metallic click echoed loudly. The front door unlocks and Jamal steps inside. Jamal closed the door behind him, letting out a heavy sigh that carried the weight of a grueling 14-hour trauma shift. He stood in the spacious foyer of his father-in-law's house, slowly unbuttoning his thick winter coat. As an emergency room physician at the busiest trauma center in the city, Jamal was intimately familiar with chaos. He spent his nights pulling people back from the brink of death, fighting to stabilize shattered bodies and comforting devastated families. His hands were calloused from endless chest compressions, and his eyes bore the permanent dark circles of a man who rarely slept a full 8 hours. He was the definition of hard work, a dedicated African American man who fought tooth and nail for every single thing he achieved in this world. He married Stephanie believing she shared his values of dedication and family. He worked double shifts, picking up extra holiday rotations just to ensure their mortgage was paid because Stephanie constantly complained about the rising cost of their suburban lifestyle. He walked into the house expecting the usual quiet morning routine, a warm cup of coffee and a few hours of uninterrupted sleep before his kids woke up. Instead, he stepped right into a thick atmosphere of sheer panic. The moment Jamal's heavy work boots echoed on the hardwood floor, the chaotic shouting in the dining room abruptly ceased. Stephanie practically scrambled out of her chair, nearly tripping over the hem of her expensive cashmere robe. She sprinted toward the front hallway, desperate to intercept her husband before he could fully enter the kitchen area. Jamal rubbed his tired eyes, blinking against the bright morning sunlight streaming through the foyer windows. He looked past his frantic wife and noticed a massive pile of pristine shopping bags stacked neatly near the grand staircase. The glossy bags bore the unmistakable logos of Chanel and Gucci, stacked high like a monument to extreme consumerism. They had been delivered just moments prior by an exclusive holiday luxury concierge service, a premium perk Stephanie utilized whenever she went on one of her wild spending binges. Stephanie threw her body in front of the pile, spreading her arms wide in a pathetic attempt to block the towering stack of designer cardboard from her husband's line of sight. Her chest heaved and she forced a painfully bright smile onto her face. Jamal frowned, his medical instincts immediately registering her elevated heart rate and flushed skin. He stepped to the side, easily looking past her frail blockade. He pointed a steady finger at the mountain of luxury goods sitting in his father-in-law's hallway. "What is all of this, Stephanie?" he asked, his deep voice rumbling with pure confusion. "I just worked a 14-hour night shift because you told me we were short on the mortgage payment this month. Why are there thousands of dollars worth of designer bags sitting in the foyer?" Stephanie let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh that sounded like cracking glass. "Oh, honey," she chirped quickly, stepping forward to grab his hands. "You will not believe the amazing news. It is a surprise corporate bonus from my marketing firm today. They had an incredible fourth quarter and decided to reward the top senior executives with luxury holiday gifts. Is that not just wonderfully generous of them?" Jamal stared at her, his exhaustion making it difficult to process the sheer absurdity of her claim. "A corporate bonus," he repeated slowly, pulling his hands away from her desperate grasp. "Your company handed out Gucci bags instead of a direct deposit or a standard holiday check. That makes absolutely no logical sense, Stephanie. We have shared a bank account for 6 years, and your firm has never once handed out retail shopping bags as a year-end bonus." Stephanie swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the dining room. She reached out again, trying to physically push Jamal toward the stairs leading to their guest bedroom. "You are just exhausted, baby," she cooed, her voice trembling with barely suppressed panic. "You have been saving lives all night long and your brain is tired. Just go upstairs and get some rest. We can talk all about my wonderful bonus when you wake up later this afternoon." Jamal planted his feet firmly on the floor, refusing to move a single inch. His sharp eyes flicked from the designer bags to his wife's terrified face, and then toward the dining room where the rest of the family sat in a suspicious frozen silence. He knew something was deeply wrong. The air in the house was thick with unspoken guilt. Before Stephanie could utter another pathetic lie, I stepped out of the dining room and into the wide hallway. I held a crisp stack of papers in my right hand. While Thomas had been busy screaming at me, I had calmly used my phone to connect to the wireless printer in his home office, seamlessly printing out the official federal banking alerts. I walked directly past a hyperventilating Stephanie and approached the kitchen counter that separated the hallway from the dining space. I looked at the man who broke his back every single day to provide for a woman who did nothing but exploit his noble work ethic. I felt a surge of profound respect for Jamal and absolute disgust for the family trying to destroy him. "Jamal," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent space, "your wife did not receive a corporate holiday bonus this morning. She received a $25,000 unverified windfall because she crept into the living room while I was sleeping and robbed a federal corporate account." I slapped the entire stack of printed documents flat onto the marble kitchen counter. The heavy thud of the thick white paper echoed sharply. I placed my flat hand directly on the top page and slowly slid the printed Federal Bank alerts straight across the cold marble kitchen counter to Jamal. Jamal looked down at the documents resting on the cold marble counter. His dark eyes scanned the top page, absorbing the stark red text of the federal fraud warnings and the itemized list of luxury merchants. I watched his broad shoulders stiffen under his heavy winter coat. He reached out and picked up the stack of papers. Stephanie let out a strangled whimper and lunged forward, attempting to snatch the evidence right out of his hands. Jamal simply raised his arm, holding the papers out of her frantic reach. His entire focus was locked onto the devastating truth printed in black and white. His eyes darted back and forth across the pages, digesting the massive dollar amounts. $10,000 at Disney, $8,000 at Chanel, $7,000 at Gucci. He read the header indicating the card belonged to a federally monitored corporate entity. The silence in the kitchen was heavy enough to crush bone. Jamal slowly lowered the papers. He turned his head and looked at his wife. The exhaustion that had clouded his face moments ago was completely gone, replaced by a sharp, burning clarity. "You told me we were drowning," Jamal said, his voice shockingly quiet. "You cried last Tuesday because you said my salary could not cover the mortgage. You begged me to take the extra holiday shifts. I spent 48 hours straight in the trauma ward this week, pulling glass out of accident victims and pronouncing people dead so you would not lose your precious suburban house." Stephanie took a step back, shaking her head violently. "Baby, please, please," she sobbed, raising her hands in surrender. "It is not what it looks like. I was just stressed. I needed a release. I grabbed the wrong card." "A release?" Jamal roared. "You stole $25,000 from a federal account while I was elbow deep in a chest cavity, trying to save a human life. You went on a luxury shopping spree while complaining to me that we could not afford groceries." He remembered the countless nights he had slept in his cramped office at the hospital, eating stale sandwiches from the vending machine because they supposedly needed to save every single penny. I thought about the family vacations he had sacrificed while she went away on trips without him. The pieces began clicking together in his sharp medical mind. He realized this was not a singular event. This was a calculated pattern of extreme financial abuse. "All those other corporate bonuses you bragged about over the last 5 years," Jamal continued, his voice rising with every single word. "You told me your marketing firm was rewarding your hard work. You do not even have clients, Stephanie. You sit at a desk 3 days a week and pretend to work while bleeding me completely dry. I checked our credit score last month to refinance the house and it was destroyed. You told me it was identity theft. You told me someone hacked our accounts. It was you. You are the hacker. You are the thief." Jamal crumpled the Federal Bank alerts in his massive fist. He threw the mangled paper ball directly at her feet, watching it bounce across the polished wood. "You lied to my face every single day, while I gave you everything I had. I trusted you with my entire life, and you threw it away. You have been stealing from me for half a decade," Jamal shouted. "You maxed out my credit cards, you drained the kids' college funds, and now you are stealing from your own family. You just committed a federal felony. You are going to prison, Stephanie. You are a criminal." Diane could no longer stay silent. She rushed forward, grabbing Jamal's arm, trying to pacify her furious son-in-law. "Jamal, please lower your voice," Diane pleaded. "She made a mistake. We will handle it internally. Thomas will pay the bill in full today. Thomas will fix everything. Do not speak to her like that. She is your wife." He glared at Diane with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do not touch me, Diane," he snapped. "She is not a wife. She is a parasite. And your husband cannot fix this. Your husband is facing a federal money laundering investigation because your golden child could not control her greedy impulses for a single night." Jamal turned his burning gaze toward Thomas. "You raised a monster, Thomas. You taught her that consequences do not apply to your family. Well, they apply now. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about your country club memberships." Stephanie collapsed onto her knees, weeping hysterically on the expensive rug. She reached for Jamal's boots, begging him to protect her, to hide her from the police. Jamal stepped back, looking down at her with absolute zero emotion. "I am a doctor," Jamal stated, his voice dropping back into a deadly calm tone. "I took an oath to do no harm. Staying in this house, staying married to you, is doing immense harm to my children. I am done. I am completely done with you and your corrupt family. The reality of the situation finally hit Brandon. The fragile bubble of his existence was shattering in every direction. His sister was facing federal prison. His father was facing a massive financial investigation. His brother-in-law was walking out the door. The carefully constructed facade of his privileged life was burning to ash, and I was the one holding the match. Brandon could not handle the destruction of his reality. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the fire consuming his family. He turned his panicked eyes toward me, his face contorted with a desperate, irrational anger. He blamed me for bringing the truth to light. He lunged forward, crossing the dining room in 3 rapid strides. Brandon's fingers dug painfully into my right arm as he pulled me off balance. The sudden violent motion ripped me away from the chaotic scene unfolding in the dining room where Jamal was dismantling the arrogant facade of this toxic family. Brandon dragged me directly toward the dark, narrow hallway connecting the formal living spaces to the guest bedrooms. I stumbled slightly, my heels catching on the expensive Persian rug, but he did not slow down. He marched with a frantic, desperate energy, pulling me into the shadows away from the judging eyes of his furious brother-in-law. The moment we were out of sight, Brandon spun around and shoved me backward. My shoulder blades hit the cool, painted drywall with a dull thud. He stepped forward, instantly closing the distance between us. He planted both hands flat against the wall on either side of my head, physically caging me in. The charming, supportive husband mask he had worn for the entirety of our marriage dissolved in that dim hallway. His face was contorted into a terrifying mask of raw panic and vicious rage. His chest heaved as he leaned in so close I could feel his erratic breaths against my cheek. "You are going to fix this right now, Alyssa." He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper designed to stay hidden from the people in the next room. "You are going to march back into that kitchen, pick up your phone, and tell the federal agents that you personally authorized every single one of those luxury transactions. You will tell them it was a planned holiday gift, and Stephanie had your full permission to use that corporate card today." I stared up at the man I had promised to spend the rest of my life with. The sheer delusion required to make such an outrageous demand was staggering. "You want me to lie to federal investigators, Brandon?" I asked, my voice remaining deadly calm, despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "You want me to commit a felony and destroy my entire professional career to cover up your sister's blatant theft?" "Yes." Brandon spat, his eyes wide and unblinking. "She is my sister Alyssa. She is family. We protect family in this house no matter what it takes. You are going to take the fall for her because you are the only one who knows how to manipulate the auditing system. If you take the blame, they will just fire you. If Stephanie goes down, she will face federal prison time, and it will completely destroy my parents. You owe us this, Alyssa. You owe this family for everything we have done for you." I let out a sharp, humorless breath. "I owe you," I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "I do not owe you or your corrupt family absolutely anything. I will not compromise my integrity or my freedom for a woman who crept into the dark and robbed me blind." The moment the word no left my lips, Brandon lost whatever fragile grip he had left on his sanity. A vicious, ugly sneer twisted his features. "You ungrateful, arrogant leech," he growled, leaning his body weight heavier against the wall to intimidate me further. "You think you are so vastly superior to everyone in this house just because you have a fancy corporate title. You forget where you came from," he continued, his verbal assault escalating into cruelty. "You were nothing when I met you, Alyssa. You were a desperate, exhausted girl, drowning in student loans, working 3 jobs just to keep your head above water. My family welcomed you. We gave you a lifestyle you could never have achieved alone. We elevated you from the gutter and gave you a respectable name. You should be thanking my father for even allowing you to sit at his table. Instead, you act like you own the place, destroying my sister's life over a few $1,000s. His words were designed to trigger the old insecurities I had worked so hard to overcome. But they did not hurt me. They only solidified my disgust for him. "You elevated me," I countered, my tone dropping into a lethal register. "I paid off my student loans by working 80-hour weeks while you spent your evenings playing video games. I earned my licenses through sheer relentless dedication. Your family did not give me anything except headaches and endless holiday drama. In fact, I have been the one financially supporting this marriage while you funneled our money behind my back." Brandon froze. His arms stiffened against the wall and the vicious sneer on his face faltered. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice losing its aggressive edge. "Do not play dumb with me, Brandon," I said, locking my eyes fiercely onto his. "I am a forensic risk auditor. Tracking hidden financial transfers is exactly what I do. Did you honestly think I would never notice the thousands you have been secretly wiring to Stephanie's accounts for the past 3 years? You took the money I earned and handed it directly to your sister. You are just as much of a thief as she is." Brandon stepped back, stumbling slightly. His arms dropped from the wall, and the physical threat he tried to project vanished completely. He realized in that agonizing second that I knew all his dark secrets. The manipulation tactic had utterly failed. He could not bully me into submission, and he could not guilt me into taking the fall today. Desperation washed over his face as he realized the authorities were still coming, and he was out of options. "Fine," he shouted, his voice cracking. "If you will not fix this mess, I will do it myself. I will wire the money right now and make this disaster disappear before the police arrive." He turned his back on me and sprinted desperately down the hallway, leaving me standing alone, right there in the shadows. I did not rush after my frantic husband as he fled blindly down the long, dark hallway away from me now. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my crisp white blouse before walking toward the guest bedroom at a measured, deliberate pace. He had promised to fix the catastrophic damage his sister had caused, but I knew exactly what his version of fixing meant. When I reached the doorway of our temporary room, I found him tearing frantically through our luggage. Clothes were thrown haphazardly across the unmade sleeper sofa. He was hunting for his heavy silver laptop case, his breath coming in jagged, panicked gasps. "You are making a massive mistake, Brandon," I warned him, my voice cutting through the chaotic sounds of his frantic search. "You cannot simply cover up a federal fraud alert by moving money around like it is a game of Monopoly. You will only implicate yourself in a massive financial crime." He finally yanked the silver laptop from its leather sleeve. He gripped it tightly against his chest, turning to face me with a look of absolute deranged hostility. "You do not get to dictate how I protect my family, Alyssa." He snarled, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure resentment. "You sit there acting like some high and mighty moral authority, but you forget exactly who you were before you married me. You were nothing but a pathetic charity case drowning in six-figure student loan debt. Do you remember those days, Alyssa? Do you remember working 3 dead-end jobs just to afford cheap ramen noodles and rent for a rundown apartment in the worst part of the city? I remember it perfectly." I stood completely still, refusing to let his cruel words land a single blow. He took a step toward me, using his laptop like a physical shield. "My parents graciously accepted you into this prestigious family," Brandon continued, raising his voice as if volume could somehow make his terrible arguments valid. "They overlooked your poverty. They overlooked your complete lack of social standing. They gave you a respectable last name and invited you to sit at their expensive dining table. You should be down on your knees thanking them for pulling you out of the miserable gutter you came from. Instead, you use your fancy new corporate job to destroy my sister over a few handbags. You are a cold, calculating, ungrateful snake." The audacity of his revisionist history was truly breathtaking. I did not flinch or look away. I stared right into the eyes of a man who was completely disconnected from reality. "Your family did not pull me out of any gutter, Brandon," I stated, my voice resonating with an icy, absolute authority. "I pulled myself out. I worked those 3 exhausting jobs while attending night classes to earn my degrees. I paid off every single cent of my student loans through sheer relentless determination. I built my career from the ground up without a single handout from your arrogant father or your manipulative mother. Your family did not give me anything except endless demands and suffocating expectations." Brandon let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sounded more like a bark of desperate panic. "You are so full of yourself," he sneered. "You think you are the sole provider. You think you carry this entire marriage on your back. You would be absolutely lost without my financial stability, Alyssa. I am the one who holds everything together while you play corporate detective. I felt a tight, cold smile spread across my face. The sheer projection in his words was almost comical. Your financial stability. I repeated the phrase, tasting the bitter irony on my tongue. Let us talk about your so-called financial stability, Brandon. Let us talk about how you have been systematically draining our resources behind my back for years. Let us talk about the truth you have been so desperate to hide from me. Brandon stiffened his grip on the silver laptop, tightening until his knuckles turned completely white. What are you talking about? He demanded, though the sudden waver in his voice betrayed his escalating fear. I am a forensic risk auditor, Brandon. I reminded him, stepping fully into the bedroom and closing the door softly behind me. Did you honestly believe I would never review our own personal banking statements? Did you think you could hide a massive ongoing financial hemorrhage from a woman who tracks missing money for a living? I know exactly what you have been doing for the past 3 years. I know you have been secretly funneling thousands of dollars directly into Stephanie's personal accounts every single month. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the dim morning light. He opened his mouth to deny the accusation, but I did not give him the chance to utter a single lie. Do not even try to deny it, I commanded sharply. I have the entire paper trail downloaded and secured. While I was working 80-hour weeks to cover our rent, our utility bills, and our daily living expenses, you were taking your entire paycheck and handing it over to your greedy sister so she could maintain her fake luxury lifestyle. You subsidized her designer shoes and her expensive vacations while letting me bear the entire financial burden of our marriage. You are not a provider, Brandon. You are a pathetic enabler who stole from his own wife to buy his sister's affection. Brandon looked like he had been physically struck. You are wrong, he shouted, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. I can fix this. I have to fix this. I am not going to let you destroy my family. He lunged forward, dropping his shoulder and shoving past me with brute force. He sprinted back toward the living room, clutching the laptop. I am fixing this myself, he screamed back at me now. I watched his retreating back as he sprinted into the living room, clutching the silver laptop like a lifeline. He threw himself onto the leather sofa, knocking over the heavy glass coffee table. His hands were shaking so violently that he dropped the device twice before managing to flip the screen open. The bright glow of the monitor illuminated his pale, sweating face in the dim room. I walked slowly down the hallway, taking deliberate, measured steps. I had absolutely no intention of ever stopping him doing this today. When someone is determined to destroy their own reality, the best thing you can do is simply get out of their way and let them finish the job. I was muttering frantically to himself while his fingers flew across the keyboard. He slammed the enter key, typing in the web address for our primary banking portal. This was the bank that held the joint savings account we had opened 5 years ago. It was the account where I had deposited the vast majority of my hard-earned salary. We had called it our future house fund for many long years. To Brandon, however, it was clearly just an emergency bailout reserve for his corrupt relatives. I stood quietly in the archway of the living room, folding my arms across my chest. What exactly is your brilliant plan, Brandon? I asked, my voice projecting clearly across the silent space. He did not look up from the glowing screen. His eyes darted rapidly, tracking the loading pages of the financial dashboard. I am creating a paper trail, he hissed through clenched teeth. I am going to wire $50,000 directly into my dad's corporate shell account right now, this very day. I will label the transaction as an advance reimbursement for business expenses. If the federal agents see that the company was already scheduled to receive a massive deposit from us, they will have to believe Stephanie just used the wrong card by mistake. The money will cover what she spent and give my dad enough capital to satisfy the initial federal inquiry. It is a perfect cover story. I stared at the man sitting on the sofa, completely bewildered by his profound lack of financial literacy. You are going to use our life savings to fabricate a fake corporate record. You think the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation will just look at a sudden random wire transfer of $50,000 and decide to close a massive money laundering investigation. You think shifting our personal funds into a highly scrutinized offshore shell account is going to make you look like a savior. Brandon, it makes you look like a co-conspirator. You are actively attempting to commit wire fraud right in front of a forensic accountant. I ignored my warning entirely. His delusion had completely taken over, overriding any basic sense of logical self-preservation today. I was operating on pure blind loyalty to a family that would gladly throw him under the bus to save themselves. I have to protect them, Alyssa, he cried out, his voice cracking with desperate panic. They are my blood. Stephanie made a stupid mistake, and my dad is just trying to keep his business afloat. I am not going to let you tear this family apart just because you want to prove a point. I will drain our entire savings right now if it means keeping my sister out of a prison cell. We can always earn more money. I only have one family, he added, his fingers aggressively tapping the trackpad. The sheer betrayal in his words did not break my heart. It merely confirmed everything I already knew about the fragile, pathetic nature of our marriage. He was willing to sacrifice every single hour of my hard work, every late night I spent auditing files, and every dollar I saved for our future. He was burning our entire life to the ground to keep his father's arrogant facade perfectly intact. He navigated to the wire transfer portal immediately. I watched his fingers type out the routing numbers. I knew the complicated offshore account details by heart, which proved this was not the first time he had funneled money into his father's shady business. He moved his cursor to the amount field. He typed a 5 followed by 4 zeros. $50,000, the entire balance of our joint savings account. Every penny we had to our names was sitting right there on the screen, waiting to be sacrificed on the altar of his family's toxic ego. He took a deep, jagged breath and placed his index finger firmly on the edge of the smooth laptop computer trackpad. I am doing the right thing, he whispered to himself, trying to validate his own crime. I am saving us. He pushed his finger down and clicked the bright blue transfer button. The screen shifted, displaying a small loading circle. Brandon leaned forward, his nose almost touching the monitor. I was waiting for the green confirmation checkmark that would instantly validate his desperate, heroic sacrifice. I was waiting for the digital receipt he could proudly show his father to prove his absolute loyalty. The loading circle spun for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the screen violently flashed a very bright white. The bright blue interface disappeared entirely. It was instantly replaced by a stark, glaring red warning banner that stretched across the entire width of the monitor. Brandon let out a sharp, confused gasp. He hit the refresh button frantically, but the screen remained locked on the error page. The bright red text glared back at him, illuminating the absolute devastation of his failed plan. The message did not say transaction pending. It did not say processing error. The bold crimson letters displayed 2 simple, terrifying words that shattered his reality into a million completely unrecoverable broken pieces forever. Account frozen. Brandon stared at the glowing red letters. He blinked rapidly, rubbing his eyes, expecting the terrifying warning to vanish and be replaced by a green confirmation checkmark. But the crimson banner remained aggressively bright against the harsh white background. He let out a strangled sound. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed by sudden panic. Then the denial kicked in. He slammed his hand down on the trackpad, hitting the refresh button with violent force. The screen went blank for a fraction of a second before snapping back to the exact same glaring red error message. He hit refresh again and again. Each click of the mouse pad echoed sharply in the quiet living room, a frantic rhythm of absolute desperation. "This is a mistake," he muttered, his voice tight and breathless. "This is just a server glitch. The network must be down. The bank is doing maintenance." He started hitting the keyboard with both hands, typing the web address again, trying to bypass the security block by accessing the mobile site. Nothing worked. Every single avenue he attempted led straight back to that impenetrable digital wall. The money was locked away. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table, his hands shaking violently. He dialed the customer service number, aggressively punching the 0 key to bypass the robotic menu. When a polite voice finally answered, Brandon completely lost his temper. He screamed into the receiver, demanding that the freeze be lifted immediately. He claimed he was trying to make a legitimate business transfer and threatened to sue them if they did not release his funds. The representative remained frustratingly calm, placing him on a brief hold to review the account status. Brandon paced back and forth across the Persian rug, running his free hand through his disheveled hair. He looked like a trapped animal searching for an exit that simply did not exist. The representative returned to the line, her voice stripped of its warmth. She informed him coldly that the account had been frozen by an external mandate, and she was legally prohibited from overriding the security lock. She advised him to await written communication and abruptly disconnected the call. Brandon stared at the dead phone screen, throwing the device onto the sofa, letting out a scream of pure frustration. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching this pathetic display of toxic entitlement slowly crumble into dust. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the grown man having a total mental meltdown right in the middle of his father's expensive living room today. For years, I had watched him play the role of the perfect supportive husband, while secretly siphoning away our security to feed his sister's greedy lifestyle. He thought he was a mastermind operating in the shadows. I thought I was just a naive workaholic who would never question the shifting numbers in our joint ledger. He drastically underestimated the woman he married. I am a professional who dismantles massive corporate fraud networks for a living. I dissect complex offshore tax evasion schemes. Did he honestly believe a sloppy domestic wire transfer would somehow escape my notice? I had been watching his little financial maneuvers for months, allowing him to dig his own grave deeper until he was entirely trapped. I stepped out of the shadows and walked slowly into the living room. My footsteps were deliberate and steady, completely devoid of panic. He spun around, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He pointed a shaking finger at the laptop screen. You have to fix this," he begged, his voice cracking with hysteria. "The bank made a massive mistake. They froze the joint account. The money is locked and I cannot send the wire transfer to my dad. You know people in the financial sector. You have to call someone and make them release our funds right now." He actually believed this was a random administrative error. He was so blinded by his own desperate arrogance that he could not see the massive trap I had built. I did not rush to his side. I did not pull out my phone to call in a favor. I simply walked over to the doorway, leaning my shoulder casually against the solid wooden frame. I crossed my arms over my crisp white blouse, watching him squirm under the weight of his own failure. I let the silence stretch out, allowing his panic to fester and grow until it consumed all the oxygen in the room. He stared at me, waiting for me to leap into action and save his corrupt family from their inevitable downfall. "The bank did not make a mistake, Brandon," I finally said, my voice smooth and perfectly controlled. "Financial institutions do not randomly freeze joint savings accounts containing $50,000 without a very specific and legally binding reason. The system operated exactly as it was instructed." Brandon frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, taking a hesitant step toward me. "Instructed? Who instructed them to freeze our money? Nobody called the bank, Alyssa. It just happened. It is a glitch. We have to override it before the federal agents get here and drag Stephanie away." He reached out, grabbing the laptop and turning the screen toward me, as if showing me the red error message would somehow compel me to fix it. I was still clinging to the delusion that I was on his side. He still thought we were fighting against an unfair system. He had no idea that I was the system. I pushed myself off the doorframe and took 3 slow steps toward the coffee table. I reached into the deep pocket of my slacks, pulling out a heavy, thick manila envelope. I held it up, letting the morning light catch the crisp edges of the paper. I did not hand it to him. I simply tossed the thick manila envelope directly onto his laptop keyboard. It landed with a heavy, satisfying slap, completely covering the glowing red error message that had brought him to his knees. Brandon stared at the yellow paper, his chest heaving with exertion and pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at me, his eyes begging for an explanation. He was entirely too terrified to actually hear. "I am a forensic risk auditor, Brandon," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "I spend my entire life tracking financial deception. Did you really think I would not secure my own assets the absolute second I realized you were robbing me blind? You thought you were so clever, slipping thousands of dollars into Stephanie's accounts. You thought I was just a blind workaholic. But you made a catastrophic mistake 3 months ago." I watched the blood drain completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost, illuminated by the harsh morning light filtering through the window blinds. 3 months ago, I continued stepping closer to the coffee table, my tone razor sharp. My mother was hospitalized. She needed emergency surgery, and we discussed dipping into our joint savings to cover the initial co-payments before her insurance kicked in. You told me the transfer was delayed by a banking holiday. You told me we had to wait 72 hours. I believed you because I trusted you. But while my mother was lying in a hospital bed waiting for surgery, you took $10,000 out of our joint account and bought Stephanie a down payment on a brand new luxury SUV. Brandon let out a strangled gasp. He reached out, grabbing the edge of the glass coffee table to physically steady himself. You did not buy that car for her because she needed it, Brandon, I snarled, leaning in so close I could see the sweat forming on his brow. You bought it because she threatened to tell your arrogant father about the gambling debt you accrued during your supposed business trips to Vegas. You used the money meant for my dying mother's medical care to buy your sister's silence. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He crumbled, falling backward onto the leather sofa, staring at me with absolute sheer terror. The very day I discovered that transaction, Brandon, I legally moved every single cent of my own money, I stated, crossing my arms over my crisp white blouse. My salary, my bonuses, the inheritance from my grandfather. Every penny I brought into this marriage was quietly and legally transferred into a blind trust, completely inaccessible to you or your corrupt family. That joint savings account you just tried to drain, it only held the pathetic remainder of your own meager salary. The $50,000 you thought you were transferring today did not even exist. The account was frozen because it was flagged for insufficient funds and suspicious activity the moment you tried to wire money you did not possess to an offshore shell account. Brandon stared at the manila envelope resting on his keyboard. His hands shook violently as he reached out and slowly pulled back the metal clasp. He tipped the envelope, pouring the contents onto the glass table. A thick stack of crisp white legal documents slid out. The header on the top page was printed in bold black ink. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Brandon let out a pathetic whimpering sound. He picked up the top page, his eyes scanning the aggressive legal jargon. Alyssa, please, he begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. You cannot do this. We can fix this. I will go to rehab for the gambling. I will make Stephanie pay back every cent. Just please do not leave me right now. I looked down at the man kneeling among the wreckage of his own arrogant choices. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, no lingering affection. The love I once had for him had been systematically dismantled by years of deception and enabling toxicity. I already signed them, Brandon, I pointed out, gesturing to the bottom of the page where my signature sat in bold blue ink. I am completely done with you. I am done subsidizing your sister's fake luxury lifestyle. I am done hiding your financial mistakes from your overbearing father. I am done being the silent, compliant scapegoat for a family of narcissistic criminals. You are going to sign those papers today, I commanded, my voice echoing with pure, unyielding authority. And if you attempt to fight me on a single asset or demand a single cent in alimony, I will hand the entire file of your illegal gambling transfers directly to the Internal Revenue Service investigators currently en route to this house. You will go to federal prison right alongside your father and your sister. The sheer weight of the impending destruction finally broke him completely. He sobbed wildly, clutching the divorce papers against his chest, rocking back and forth on the expensive leather sofa. I was a broken, pathetic shell of the confident, arrogant man who had pinned me against the hallway wall just 15 minutes prior. The complete reversal of power was deeply satisfying. I had meticulously planned every single step of this glorious exit. I ensured my financial security while methodically gathering the evidence needed to ensure they could never harm anyone else again. I turned my back on my soon-to-be ex-husband, ready to walk out of that guest bedroom and leave this toxic family behind forever. I reached for the brass door handle, feeling a profound sense of absolute liberation washing over my entire body. I was finally free. But before I could turn the handle, a massive, violent crash echoed through the walls. Crashing noises echo from the living room. I threw open the bedroom door and sprinted down the hallway. The crashing noises echoing from the living room were not the sounds of accidental destruction. They were the sounds of a man systematically dismantling an empire of lies. I skidded to a halt under the wide archway, taking in the absolute chaos unfolding before my eyes. Jamal stood right in the center of the room, breathing heavily. A heavy antique crystal vase lay completely shattered against the stone fireplace. Thomas was pressed hard against the mantel, looking genuinely terrified for the very first time in his arrogant, pathetic life. Stephanie was cowering behind a leather armchair, weeping uncontrollably. 6 years, Jamal roared, his deep voice vibrating with the absolute authoritative command of an emergency room trauma chief. 6 years, I sat at your formal dining table and swallowed your thinly veiled racist insults, Thomas. I smiled politely when you made snide jokes about affirmative action pushing me through medical school. I bit my tongue when you asked if I felt out of place in this wealthy, gated suburban neighborhood. I endured every single microaggression because I loved your daughter, and I wanted to keep the peace in this house. Thomas raised his trembling hands defensively, attempting to pacify his son-in-law. Now, Jamal, let us not get overly emotional here, Thomas stammered. We always respected your career. Emotional Jamal interrupted, taking a menacing step forward. You think this is just raw emotion? This is a clinical diagnosis of your absolute moral corruption. You thought I was just a highly useful prop, Thomas. You saw me as a highly respectable doctor to parade around your rich country club friends to prove how supposedly progressive you are. But you also saw something else entirely. You saw a pristine credit score attached to a high-earning, secure medical license. The blood drained rapidly from Thomas's face. He glanced nervously at the hallway where I stood watching, but Jamal commanded his full attention again. Did you honestly think I would never find the secondary commercial mortgage documents? Jamal demanded, his voice cold and sharp as a scalpel. Did you truly believe I would never run a deep, comprehensive background check on my own financial portfolio? I am a physician, Thomas. I operate on precision and facts. When I applied for a practice expansion loan last month, the bank flagged my profile for massive outstanding commercial debt. Debt I never authorized. Stephanie gasped loudly, looking at her father with wide, horrified eyes. You forged his signature, she whispered. He forged my signature as a primary co-signer for 3 massive commercial loans to float his sinking import business, Jamal confirmed, turning his burning gaze toward his wife. And you knew about the financial stress, Stephanie. You knew we were supposedly broke, but you never questioned how your father maintained this lavish lifestyle while his company bled money. You were too busy stealing from Alyssa to fund your own fake luxury facade to notice your father was busy stealing my entire financial identity. Thomas tried to stand tall, attempting to summon his usual arrogant authority, but he looked small and pathetic. It was temporary bridging capital, Thomas argued, his voice wavering. The global shipping market took a severe hit last year. I needed liquid assets to keep the supply chain moving. I was going to pay off the loans before you ever noticed. I was protecting the family legacy. You do not have a legacy, Jamal countered fiercely. You have a criminal enterprise. You stole my name to commit bank fraud. You jeopardized my medical license and my ability to provide for my own children. You are not a businessman, Thomas. You are a desperate thief wearing an expensive suit. Jamal turned his back on Thomas and looked directly at Stephanie. She shrank back under his intense, furious stare. Please, Jamal, she begged, reaching a trembling hand out toward him. We can fix this. We can sell my jewelry. We can hire lawyers. We can make a deal. I love you. Please do not do this to our family. Jamal reached down to his left hand. He gripped the heavy gold wedding band tightly. I watched as he slowly and deliberately pulled the ring off his finger. He did not throw it in anger. He simply opened his hand and let the gold band drop onto the polished hardwood floor. It landed with a sharp metallic clink that echoed loudly through the silent living room, rolling slightly before coming to a complete stop near Stephanie's bare feet. I am filing for absolute full custody of our children today, Jamal stated, his voice ringing with finality and unyielding resolve. I am leaving this house right now, and I am taking them with me. My lawyer will contact you by the end of the day. Stephanie let out an agonizing scream, throwing herself forward to grab the discarded ring. No, you cannot take my babies from me, she sobbed frantically. You cannot do this, Jamal. I am their mother. You lost the privilege of playing mother when you decided to become a felon, Jamal replied coldly, stepping away from her desperate grasp. I will not let my kids be raised by a family of unrepentant criminals. I will not let them grow up thinking that bank fraud, identity theft, and credit card robbery are just normal, acceptable household activities. They are coming with me, and you will only see them through supervised visitation, if a judge even allows that. The sheer finality in Jamal's words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Thomas remained completely silent, entirely defeated by the exposure of his financial crimes. Stephanie wailed on the floor, clutching the gold ring against her chest, realizing her perfect suburban life was entirely over. I stood in the archway, feeling a deep, profound respect for Jamal. Diane suddenly stopped weeping, wiping away her fake tears. She smiled coldly, finally revealing her true, dark, manipulative nature. The transition was abrupt and seamless, genuinely terrifying to witness. One moment she was the devastated matriarch, mourning the sudden destruction of her family, and the next her face smoothed into a mask of pure, calculated malice. The tears vanished completely without a trace. She reached into the pocket of her designer slacks, pulling out a silk handkerchief to dab her eyes with precise, practiced movements. She did not look at the front door where her son-in-law had just walked out, taking his children and his pristine credit score with him forever. She did not look at her golden child Stephanie, still sobbing pathetically on the expensive Persian rug. She did not even look at her arrogant husband, Thomas, currently pressed against the stone fireplace, looking like a trapped animal. Diane focused her chilling gaze entirely on me. She slowly stood up, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from her elegant mourning outfit. Her posture shifted instantly from a crumbling victim to a predatory force. This was the woman who had truly run this household for decades from the shadows. Thomas might have been the loud, arrogant voice of the family, but Diane was the quiet, venomous architect of their toxic dynamics. She took a deliberate step toward me, the heels of her shoes clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The sound echoed loudly in the sudden silence of the large living room. Brandon was still trapped in the dark hallway, drowning in the reality of the divorce papers I had just served him, but Diane did not care about her son right now. She only cared about eliminating the immediate threat to her comfortable, privileged existence, and that massive threat was me. "You really think you have won today, Alyssa?" Diane stated, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that commanded absolute attention. "You walk into my pristine house and you think you can simply destroy my family with a few printed banking alerts and some arrogant threats. You think your little corporate title gives you the power to dismantle decades of our hard work." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh, sounding like cracking ice. "You are nothing but an insignificant, heavily indebted girl who got incredibly lucky when my son decided to lower his standards and marry you. We gave you a seat at our table. We allowed you to pretend you were one of us. And this is how you repay our immense generosity today. By throwing a temper tantrum over a misplaced credit card and trying to send my husband and daughter to prison." I maintained my position in the archway, keeping my arms loosely crossed over my chest. I did not flinch or step back as she approached. Her intimidation tactics were pathetic compared to the intense federal investigations I handled on a weekly basis. I stared right into her cold, calculating eyes, letting her see that her harsh words had absolutely no effect on my resting heart rate. "You are entirely delusional, Diane," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "Your daughter committed grand larceny, and your husband committed bank fraud. I merely provided the necessary documentation. The destruction of this family is entirely your own doing." Diane narrowed her eyes into dark, dangerous slits. Her fake smile twisted into a vicious, ugly sneer. "You listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful wretch," Diane hissed, stopping just 2 feet away from my face. "You are going to fix this mess right now, or I will personally ensure that your entire life is completely ruined. You think Thomas is powerless just because Jamal threw a little dramatic fit. You clearly do not understand how the real business world operates, Alyssa. My husband plays golf with the managing partners of every major accounting firm in this state. He sits on the advisory boards of massive commercial banks that hold the mortgages of your superiors. He has political connections that extend far beyond your tiny, pathetic comprehension." She leaned in closer, her voice dripping with pure, toxic malice. "If you do not call off this ridiculous federal alert and destroy those divorce papers immediately, I will have Thomas make one single phone call. Just one call, Alyssa. That is all it will take to have you permanently blacklisted from the entire financial sector." I will make sure your professional license is revoked for gross negligence and ethical violations. I will have our ruthless lawyers bury you in so much aggressive retaliatory litigation that you will be completely bankrupt before the end of the month. We will take your house and your savings. We will completely obliterate your professional reputation forever. By the end of this week, you will be working drive-thrus in a fast food restaurant begging for minimum wage just to survive. Her heavy threat hung densely in the air, filling the living room with a toxic, suffocating energy. Stephanie stopped crying for a brief moment, looking up at her mother with a glimmer of desperate hope. Thomas straightened his posture against the fireplace, seemingly bolstered by his wife launching an aggressive defense of his supposed corporate empire. I listened to her entire unhinged speech without interrupting a single time. I analyzed her desperate attempt at control, recognizing it as the classic response of a severe narcissist facing absolute exposure. She was trying to weaponize my career against me, believing my professional identity was my only source of strength. She thought the threat of poverty would force me to surrender because she knew I had grown up without money. But she failed to realize that surviving poverty had made me incredibly resilient. I did not gasp or cry. I did not attempt to argue with her absurd logic or point out the glaring legal impossibilities of her ridiculous threats. I did not even bother to explain that attempting to blackmail a federal forensic auditor during an active criminal investigation was yet another massive felony to add to their growing list of charges. Instead, I simply let a long, heavy silence fall over the room. I maintained my direct, intense eye contact with Diane, watching the brief flash of confusion cross her features when her intimidation completely failed to produce the desired panic. Then I slowly, deliberately lowered my gaze. I uncrossed my arms and raised my left wrist upward. I calmly and meticulously checked the time on my luxury watch. The second hand on my watch swept past the 12. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. I slowly lowered my wrist and lifted my gaze back to Diane. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wild with the manic energy of a woman who fully expected me to fall to my knees and beg for mercy. She waited for the terror to set in, for the realization of her immense power to crush my spirit. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed brightly in the tense living room. The sound hit her like a physical strike. Her manicured hands curled into tight fists at her sides. "You think this is funny?" Diane snarled, taking another aggressive step forward, abandoning all pretense of suburban elegance. "You think I am making empty threats, Alyssa. You have no idea what my husband can do to people who cross us." "I know exactly what your husband can do, Diane," I replied, my voice perfectly level and crisp. "I have spent the last 3 months analyzing every single thing your husband has done for the past decade. I know about his golf buddies, his advisory board seats, and his political donations. I know every dirty little secret buried in his corporate ledgers. But there is one crucial detail you seem to have missed while you were busy planning my demise." I shifted my attention from the furious matriarch to the pale, trembling patriarch standing by the fireplace. Thomas looked physically ill. The bravado he had displayed earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by a deep, instinctual dread. "You cannot blacklist me using Thomas's company, Diane," I stated, letting each word land with absolute precision. "Because Thomas does not own that company anymore." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic implosion. Stephanie stopped her pathetic whimpering on the floor. Brandon, who had finally crawled out of the dark hallway, froze in the archway. Thomas clutched the stone mantel of the fireplace, his knuckles turning stark white. "What are you talking about?" Thomas choked out his voice, a hoarse, rattling rasp. "I am the founder. I am the chief executive officer. I own 51% of the voting shares." "You owned 51% of the shares," Thomas corrected him, taking a deliberate step toward the center of the room. "But you clearly forgot the morality clause you signed when you took on those 3 massive institutional investors 5 years ago. The clause that allows the board of directors to instantly strip you of your executive powers and seize your equity in the event of gross financial misconduct." I watched his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated terror. He knew exactly which clause I was talking about. 48 hours ago, I continued, projecting my voice so every single member of this corrupt family could hear their doom spelled out. I submitted my final confidential forensic audit directly to your board of directors. I bypassed your internal financial officers because they were complicit in your money laundering schemes. I handed the board a completely undeniable, fully documented paper trail of your gross embezzlement. I showed them exactly how you were funneling corporate revenue into offshore shell accounts to maintain this ridiculous, lavish lifestyle. Diane let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She looked at her husband, expecting him to shout, to deny it, to threaten me again. But Thomas just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The board held an emergency executive session late last night. While you were busy sleeping in your expensive bed, I revealed delivering the fatal blow. They voted unanimously. You have been officially ousted, Thomas. You were stripped of your title, your salary, and your access to the corporate infrastructure effectively immediately. The legal notices were sent to your corporate inbox at 6 o'clock this morning. If you had bothered to check your email instead of screaming at me over a cup of espresso, you would have already known that you are entirely powerless. Diane shook her head violently, her perfect hair falling out of place. No, she whispered, stepping back as if the floor had suddenly turned to hot coals. No, that is impossible. You are lying. He built that company from the ground up. I built a house of cards. Diane and I just pulled out the bottom row, I replied coldly. Your husband has no leverage left in the financial sector. His former golf buddies on those advisory boards are currently scrambling to sever all ties with him before the federal indictments drop. Nobody is going to blacklist me, Diane. In fact, the board of directors just offered me a massive permanent consulting contract to help them salvage whatever is left of the legitimate business operations after the federal government seizes your husband's illicit assets. The reality of their absolute destruction finally settled over the room. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely obliterated. Diane looked around her pristine, expensive living room, realizing that she no longer owned any of it. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the endless shopping sprees for her spoiled daughter, it was all gone. It was funded by stolen money, and the vault had just been permanently sealed shut. Thomas collapsed into the leather armchair, burying his face in his trembling hands. He was a ruined man, stripped of the only thing that gave him value in his own eyes, his wealth. Stephanie curled into a tight ball on the rug, weeping for the loss of her financial safety net. Brandon stood in the archway, staring at me with a mixture of awe and absolute terror, finally understanding the true magnitude of the woman he had tried to betray. I stood in the center of their shattered empire, feeling a profound sense of vindication. I had warned them. I had given them every opportunity to act with basic human decency. Instead, they chose arrogance. They chose greed. They chose to protect a thief and attack the only person trying to hold them accountable. They genuinely believed that their money and status made them untouchable. The heavy silence in the living room was suddenly broken. The harsh, aggressive sound of heavy tires screeching to a violent halt on the gravel driveway outside shattered the quiet morning air. The intense, brilliant flash of alternating red and blue lights instantly flooded through the expensive, sheer curtains of the grand living room window. The vibrant colors danced frantically across the high vaulted ceilings and reflected off the scattered shards of the broken espresso cup still lying on the dining room floor. The rapid strobing effect cast harsh moving shadows across the terrified faces of the family members, completely transforming their luxurious suburban sanctuary into a glaring crime scene in a matter of seconds. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, watching the absolute panic finally detonate around me. The heavy, undeniable reality of the situation crashed down upon them with the force of a concrete wall. The deafening sound of multiple heavy vehicle doors slamming shut echoed sharply through the crisp morning air. It was not just one or two cars. It sounded like an entire fleet had just locked down the entire perimeter of the massive estate. Stephanie let out a blood-curdling shriek, pressing her hands tightly against her ears, as if trying to physically block out the sounds of her impending doom. She scrambled backward on the expensive Persian rug, knocking over a heavy brass floor lamp in her blind desperation to hide. The lamp crashed against the hardwood, but she did not even register the noise. She curled her body into a tight, miserable ball behind the leather armchair, hyperventilating so violently I thought she might actually lose consciousness. Brandon remained completely frozen in the hallway archway. His jaw hung slack, and his eyes were wide with a vacant, horrified stare. He looked like a man watching a tidal wave approach, entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction hurtling toward him. He had spent his entire life believing his father was an untouchable titan, and now he was watching that entire mythology burn to the ground in real time. Diane stumbled backward, her expensive designer heels catching on the edge of the rug. She caught herself against the wall, her perfectly manicured hands clawing at the elegant floral wallpaper as she struggled to remain upright. The flawless matriarch who had just threatened to have me working at a fast food drive-thru was now trembling uncontrollably. Her pristine facade was entirely shattered, exposing the terrified, desperate woman hiding underneath. She looked toward her husband, her eyes pleading for him to perform a miracle, to use his supposed vast network of powerful friends to make the federal authorities simply vanish into thin air. But Thomas had no miracles left to offer. The patriarch of the family, the man who had built this corrupt empire on a foundation of arrogance and stolen money, finally broke. The instinct for self-preservation completely overrode his usual commanding presence. He looked at the flashing red and blue lights illuminating his living room and made the cowardly calculation of a guilty man. He did not step forward to protect his wife. He did not rush to comfort his hysterical daughter. He did not offer a single word of reassurance to his paralyzed son. Instead, Thomas spun around on his expensive Italian leather loafers and bolted. He sprinted away from the front of the house, his arms pumping wildly as he abandoned his entire family without a single backward glance. He headed straight toward the expansive gourmet kitchen, desperate to reach the heavy glass doors that opened out onto the rear patio and the private golf course situated behind the massive estate. I thought he could simply run away and disappear into the sprawling, manicured landscape, leaving everyone else to face the severe federal consequences of his multi-million-dollar crimes. He was running like a common thief, terrified of the harsh daylight. But his pathetic escape plan was thwarted before he could even reach the kitchen island. Jamal, who had been quietly strapping his young children into their car seats outside the front door, had re-entered the house through the side mudroom when he saw the armada of federal vehicles swarming the property. Jamal stepped out of the mudroom corridor and planted himself firmly in the center of the kitchen, acting as an immovable human shield. His broad, muscular shoulders and tall frame completely blocked the pathway to the back exit. Thomas skidded to a violent halt, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor. "Move out of my way, Jamal," he commanded, his voice high-pitched and cracking with desperate panic. "Get out of my way right now. I have to leave. You have to let me pass through that door." Jamal did not flinch. He did not step aside. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at his corrupt father-in-law with an expression of absolute disgust and unyielding moral authority. The man who had spent 14 hours saving lives in a trauma center was not going to let a white-collar criminal run away from justice. "You are not going anywhere," Thomas Jamal stated, his deep voice resonating with a calm, terrifying power. "You spent years looking down on me, treating me like a convenient prop for your country club image. You stole my pristine financial identity and used my good name to commit massive bank fraud. You put my medical license and my ability to feed my children at severe risk to line your own dirty pockets. You are not going to run out the back door and leave my kids to deal with the messy fallout of your pathetic, cowardly choices. You are going to stand right here and face the consequences of exactly what you have done." Thomas frantically looked around the vast kitchen, searching for another back exit, but he was completely trapped. The heavy synchronized sound of multiple combat boots marching aggressively up the wooden front porch steps echoed loudly through the entire house. The heavy footfalls sounded like an army closing in on a defeated enemy. Then loud fists pounded federal agents open up. The heavy, thick front door shuddered violently under the immense physical force of the relentless pounding. Before anyone inside the grand living room could even attempt to move toward the foyer, the thick wooden door swung violently open with a massive, deafening crash. A heavy tactical breaching ram had splintered the expensive custom wood frame, sending sharp, jagged shards of dark mahogany flying across the imported Italian marble tiles. A terrifying swarm of heavily armed federal personnel immediately flooded into the previously pristine suburban sanctuary. They all wore dark tactical combat gear with bright yellow letters, clearly identifying them as agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Internal Revenue Service. Criminal Investigation Division, emblazoned boldly across their thick protective ballistic vests. The sheer overwhelming number of highly trained federal agents pouring rapidly through the shattered front entrance was absolutely staggering, completely filling the spacious front foyer and rapidly fanning out to systematically secure every single exit and long hallway of the massive luxury estate. The armed agents moved with a terrifyingly synchronized professional efficiency. Their heavy black combat boots stomped aggressively over the delicate, expensive Persian area rugs, leaving dark, muddy tracks across the once flawless, pristine hardwood floors. Loud commanding shouts demanding absolute total compliance from everyone currently present echoed harshly off the high vaulted ceilings. Two armed agents immediately flanked the grand curved staircase, while three others moved aggressively toward the formal dining room, where my pathetic husband Brandon was still standing completely paralyzed in total shock. The sheer, overwhelming physical presence of the elite tactical team instantly stripped away every single remaining ounce of the family-arrogant suburban entitlement. This sprawling property was no longer a wealthy gated community residence. It was now an actively secured federal crime scene. A tall, imposing man with graying temples and a sharp, severe, no-nonsense demeanor strode purposefully through the shattered front entrance. He did not carry a large tactical weapon drawn like the rest of the breaching entry team, but he radiated and projected an intense aura of absolute unyielding legal authority. He firmly held a thick, heavy stack of official legal documents securely in his right hand. He quickly surveyed the chaotic panic unfolding across the living room, his sharp, dark, discerning eyes immediately and accurately identifying every single individual person currently present, based precisely on the extensive, thorough briefing he had undoubtedly received prior to launching this massive, coordinated raid. He stopped right in the exact center of the grand living room, stepping directly over the scattered, shattered remaining pieces of the delicate ceramic espresso cup. He slowly held up the thick stack of crisp white papers, unfolding the top document perfectly for everyone inside the home to clearly see the bold blue federal seal prominently stamped directly at the very top. "I am Supervisory Special Agent Davis," he announced loudly, his deep, powerful voice easily cutting completely through the frantic weeping and hyperventilating sounds presently coming from the far corner of the large room. "We are officially executing a federal search warrant legally authorized by the United States District Court today. We are immediately seizing all physical documents and digital records, corporate devices, financial ledgers, hidden hard drives, and all personal electronic equipment currently located anywhere on this residential property. Everyone here will remain exactly where they are currently standing and must keep their empty hands clearly visible to my agents at all times." The harsh reality of the federal search warrant finally broke the last remaining thread of Stephanie and her fragile, deteriorating sanity. She scrambled wildly out from behind the heavy leather armchair, crawling frantically across the expensive Persian rug, entirely on her bare hands and shaky knees. Her previously perfectly styled blonde hair was now completely disheveled, sticking wetly to her hot, tear-stained red cheeks. She completely ignored the stern vocal commands of the armed tactical agent standing nearby, entirely consumed by her own desperate, extremely selfish internal panic. She scrambled directly toward Supervisory Special Agent Davis, grabbing desperately at the heavy, thick fabric of his dark navy tactical trousers. Her expensive designer cashmere robe dragged heavily through the dark, spilled, sticky coffee, completely ruining the luxurious, soft garment forever. "Please, you must just listen to me right now," Stephanie shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, immense terror. "It was really just a stupid, harmless mistake. It was a tiny, basic misunderstanding about a black credit card early this morning. I did not mean to steal anything valuable from anyone here. I honestly thought it was my dad and his personal emergency expense account. I will gladly give all the luxury shopping bags back to the stores right now. I will cancel the fancy cruise tickets immediately today. You cannot send me away to a federal prison cell over some stupid, expensive shopping bags. I am a mother. I have two young, innocent children who desperately need me at home. Please just let me pay the bill and we can forget this morning ever happened." He gently pulled his right leg completely away from her desperate, grasping hands. He did not ask her about the luxury handbags. He did not mention the stolen credit card or the fraudulent Disney cruise tickets. He did not even acknowledge her hysterical, rambling confessions. Instead, the lead federal investigator turned his body completely away from the sobbing golden child. He locked his sharp, dark eyes directly onto the pale, sweating patriarch, currently trapped in the kitchen by his own son-in-law. Special Agent Davis walked straight past Stephanie, stepping over her huddled form, without a single glance backward. He marched directly toward the kitchen archway, holding a pair of heavy steel handcuffs in his left hand. Thomas Davis commanded, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Turn immediately around and place both of your hands securely behind your back, right now. You are officially under arrest for international money laundering." The heavy steel handcuffs locked around Thomas's wrists with a sharp and brutal metallic click. The sound reverberated through the expansive gourmet kitchen, signaling the absolute end of his corrupt reign. Thomas gasped for air, his chest heaving under his ruined espresso-stained polo shirt. He struggled against the firm grip of the federal agents, his expensive Italian leather shoes scrambling uselessly against the polished marble floor. He looked wildly around the room, searching for a loophole, a lawyer, or a bribe that could magically erase this nightmare. He found absolutely nothing. Jamal stepped back, giving the armed officers plenty of space to secure the fallen patriarch while maintaining his watchful, protective stance over the exit. Stephanie stopped her pathetic whimpering on the floor and stared at her father in total disbelief. Her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure confusion. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger toward me. "This is her fault," Stephanie shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted ceilings. "She called you people over a few stupid handbags. My dad has absolutely nothing to do with this. You are arresting the wrong person. Tell them, Alyssa. Tell them you orchestrated this entire nightmare just to punish me for borrowing your stupid credit card today." I stepped forward, leaving the shadows of the hallway and moving directly into the bright, flashing red and blue lights illuminating the center of the living room. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout to command the absolute attention of every single person in that house, including the highly trained federal agents. "You really think this massive tactical raid is about your petty theft, Stephanie?" I asked, my tone dropping into a lethal, perfectly controlled register. "You genuinely believe the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service deployed an armed breaching team to recover the cash for your upcoming luxury cruise vacation?" I walked slowly toward the kitchen archway, stopping just a few feet away from where Thomas was being forcefully restrained by Special Agent Davis. I looked directly into my father-in-law's terrified, bloodshot eyes. "Let me explain exactly how a forensic risk trap works," Thomas I stated calmly, watching his pale face turn completely ashen. "For the past 12 months, the federal government knew you were hiding millions of dollars in illegal offshore shell accounts. They had the digital footprints. They had the suspicious shipping manifests. They knew the money existed, but they lacked the final crucial piece of physical evidence required to secure a federal indictment." Thomas stopped struggling against his handcuffs. His breathing hitched as he stared at me, finally, realizing the true depth of the deception he had unwittingly invited into his home. "They could not definitively tie your encrypted offshore servers directly to your physical person." I continued, delivering the fatal blow with surgical precision. "Your expensive lawyers and your shady corporate fixers had built a massive digital firewall. The authorities needed a direct, undisputed link between the illicit funds and this specific residential internet protocol address. They needed you to make a mistake. They needed you to access those hidden funds from a highly verified, unmasked domestic location." I turned my body slightly so I could look directly down at Stephanie, who was still huddled pathetically on the ruined Persian rug. "But Thomas was way too careful to ever make that kind of sloppy mistake," I explained. "He never touched the illegal money directly, so the federal investigators needed an inside operative. They needed an independent auditor to plant a digital tripwire directly inside the corporate financial structure. I was that operative. I secured the corporate card linked directly to the offshore routing numbers, and I brought it right into this house." Stephanie gasped, clutching her cashmere robe tightly against her chest. Her eyes darted rapidly between my face and her father's restrained hands. "The card I took," she whispered, her voice trembling with the dawning realization of her own catastrophic stupidity. "The card from your purse." "Yes, Stephanie," I confirmed, allowing a sharp, cold smile to briefly touch my lips. That specific card was intentionally coded as a flagged node within the federal banking system. It was a digital mousetrap waiting for someone greedy enough to take the bait. When you crept into the dark living room and stole that card, you thought you were simply getting away with an easy payday. But you did not just steal money, you activated the trap. When you logged onto your phone using this specific residential internet connection and began processing massive transactions at Disney Cruise Line, Chanel, and Gucci, you triggered a highly sophisticated security protocol, I explained methodically. Those premium luxury merchants employ incredibly strict identity verification systems to prevent massive chargebacks. When you force those $25,000 through their payment gateways, the transactions required an immediate secure handshake with the offshore banking servers holding the illicit funds. The room was dead silent save for the heavy breathing of the restrained patriarch. I looked back at Thomas, letting him absorb the absolute poetic justice of his downfall. "Your own daughter bypassed your multi-million-dollar digital firewall in less than 3 hours," I told him, my voice ringing with profound finality. "Her transaction requests permanently linked your hidden offshore shell company routing numbers directly to the internet service provider of this exact physical address. She authorized the transfers using your network, essentially signing your full confession in digital ink." Thomas let out an agonizing, strangled cry. He slumped forward against the harsh grip of the federal agents, completely broken by the revelation. He had spent decades building an impenetrable fortress of corporate corruption, only to have his entire empire completely obliterated because he raised an entitled, spoiled daughter who could not control her shallow consumer impulses. He looked down at Stephanie with a mixture of absolute horror and pure, undeniable hatred. Stephanie finally understood the true magnitude of what she had done. She let out a piercing, devastating wail, collapsing entirely against the hardwood floor. She had not just ruined her own life. She had single-handedly destroyed her father's criminal enterprise and handed the federal government the ultimate key to his prison cell. Her desperate, relentless need to acquire luxury brands and project a fake wealthy lifestyle had driven her right into my perfectly laid snare. Stephanie's extreme vanity literally handed the feds the smoking gun. Special Agent Davis did not grant Thomas a second to process the monumental betrayal. He tightened his grip on the heavy steel handcuffs, digging into the man's wrists, and pulled him upright. Thomas stumbled forward, his Italian leather loafers scuffing against the ruined hardwood floor. The arrogant patriarch who had terrorized his business partners for decades was suddenly reduced to a trembling, pathetic shell. Davis recited the Miranda rights with cold, mechanical precision. "You have the right to remain silent," Davis stated, his voice cutting through the atmosphere of absolute despair. "Any statement you make can and will be used against you in a federal court of law." Thomas did not try to argue or leverage his powerful connections anymore. He hung his head defeated as two armed agents marched him toward the shattered front door. He was walking out of his luxurious fortress and directly into a federal holding cell. His legacy of arrogance was permanently destroyed. The tactical team shifted focus to the sobbing woman curled into a tight ball on the floor. Two female federal agents marched purposefully toward Stephanie. The heavy thud of their boots snapped her out of her hysterical crying fit. She looked up at them with wide, terrified eyes, her tear-streaked makeup ruining her pristine blonde aesthetic. "Stand up, ma'am," the taller agent commanded, her voice projecting absolute, unyielding authority. Stephanie shook her head violently, scrambling backward until her shoulders hit the base of the expensive leather armchair. "You cannot do this to me," she pleaded, her voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. "I am not a criminal mastermind. I am just a mother trying to provide a nice holiday for my children. I did not know about any offshore accounts." The agent did not offer a single ounce of sympathy, hauling her forcefully to her feet. "You are officially under arrest for federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft," the agent stated, producing a second pair of steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic click of the restraints snapping closed around her delicate wrists broke the last shred of Stephanie's sanity. She began to thrash and kick, screaming wildly at the top of her lungs. "Brandon!" she shrieked, turning her frantic gaze toward the hallway archway where her brother stood paralyzed. "Brandon, you have to help me. You have to call a lawyer right now. Tell them I did not mean to do it. Do not let them take me away from my babies." Her desperate cries bounced off the walls, but Brandon did not move a single inch. He stared at his golden child sister, realizing she was the catalyst for their catastrophic destruction. The agents did not wait for him to respond. They gripped her arms tightly and dragged her across the expensive Persian rug toward the exit. Stephanie continued screaming his name until she was shoved into the back of a waiting armored vehicle and the heavy doors slammed shut. With her husband and daughter removed from the premises, the oppressive silence in the living room returned, interrupted only by the rustling of agents securing the property. Diane remained frozen near the grand staircase, her hands trembling violently against the elegant floral wallpaper. She had watched her entire powerful family get dismantled and hauled away in handcuffs in less than 10 minutes. A younger federal agent carrying a thick clipboard approached her with measured steps. "Ma'am," the agent said, holding out a stack of heavily stamped legal documents. "I need you to sign this acknowledgement of receipt." Diane stared blankly at the paperwork, her mind refusing to comprehend the harsh reality unfolding right in front of her. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It is a formal notice of federal asset forfeiture," the agent explained coldly. "Due to the severe nature of the money laundering charges, the government is seizing all physical properties, bank accounts, and luxury vehicles associated with the primary suspect." The words hit Diane like a physical sledgehammer straight to the chest. This sprawling multi-million-dollar estate was no longer hers. The expensive imported furniture, the crystal chandeliers, the luxury cars parked in the heated garage, and the massive bank accounts she used to fund her privileged suburban lifestyle were all entirely gone. The government was taking everything. The pristine, wealthy illusion she had maintained with such ruthless manipulation had evaporated into thin air. Diane let out a low, agonizing moan. Her knees buckled beneath her, unable to support the crushing weight of her absolute ruin. She collapsed heavily onto the hardwood floor, her designer clothes pooling awkwardly around her shaking frame. The powerful, untouchable matriarch, who had threatened to destroy my professional career just moments ago, was now reduced to a weeping, homeless woman sitting in the ruins of a seized crime scene. The agent dropped the forfeiture notice onto the floor beside her and walked away to join the search team. Brandon remained standing completely still in the dark shadows of the hallway archway. He had just witnessed the total annihilation of the corrupt family he had sacrificed his own marriage to protect. He drained his bank accounts, lied to his wife, and compromised his moral integrity to keep his father and sister safe. Now they were sitting in federal transport vehicles, facing decades in federal prison. His mother was sobbing on the floor, clutching a government seizure notice that stripped her of every asset she had ever valued. The house was swarming with federal investigators, systematically boxing up decades of financial crimes. The foundation of his privileged existence had been entirely pulverized. He looked around the destroyed living room, seeing the broken espresso cup, the overturned chairs, the mud tracked across the rugs, and the flashing red and blue lights still painting the walls. The sheer magnitude of his own cowardly choices finally caught up with him. He was stripped of his safety net. Brandon remained standing alone in the wreckage of his shattered, privileged existence. The expensive custom mahogany door lay in splintered, jagged pieces across the Italian marble foyer. Federal agents continued their systematic search, pulling hidden hard drives from his father's secret home office. His mother, Diane, was still completely collapsed on the ruined Persian rug, clutching the federal asset forfeiture notice against her chest in a state of catatonic shock. Brandon turned his panicked, terrified eyes away from his weeping mother and looked directly at me. I was standing perfectly still near the kitchen archway, watching the destruction unfold with complete emotional detachment. The gravity of his isolation finally crashed down upon him. He willingly sacrificed his own marriage, drained our joint savings, and lied to my face repeatedly to maintain his position in this pathetic criminal hierarchy. Now his father and sister were facing decades in a maximum security prison. His mother was entirely destitute, stripped of every luxury asset she had ever valued. His pristine suburban life was pulverized into dust. He had absolutely nothing and no one left in this world except the woman he had actively tried to betray just 1 hour ago. I took a shaky, hesitant step toward me. His expensive designer dress shirt was soaked with nervous sweat clinging to his trembling frame. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, matching the manic energy radiating from his bloodshot eyes. Alyssa, he whispered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of his newly discovered reality. He took another stumbling step, closing the distance between us. His legs suddenly gave out, unable to support his own weight anymore. Brandon collapsed heavily, falling squarely onto his knees right in front of me. The sudden impact loudly echoed, but I did not flinch. He reached forward with trembling hands, grabbing the fabric of my dark slacks. He clung to my legs like a drowning man clutching a life preserver. "Please, Alyssa," he begged, his voice dissolving into wet, pathetic sobs. "Please, you have to listen to me. I did not want any of this to happen. I swear to you, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." Tears streamed rapidly down his pale face, splashing onto the polished wooden floorboards. I was weeping with the raw desperation of a terrified child realizing he made a catastrophic, unfixable mistake. "I was completely brainwashed," Alyssa, Brandon cried, tightening his desperate grip on my pants. "You know how my father is. You know how manipulative and demanding he has always been. He raised me to believe that protecting the family name was the only thing that ever mattered. He conditioned me to always bail Stephanie out no matter the cost. I was trapped in their toxic web for my entire life. I did not know how to escape them. I was so scared of losing my family that I completely lost my own mind." He looked up at me, pleading. "I will change," Brandon promised frantically, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush to secure his survival. "I will do whatever you want. I will sign whatever documents you need me to sign. I will go to extensive therapy. I will testify against my father in federal court if that is what you want. I will cut them all off completely and never speak to them again. Just please do not leave me alone in this nightmare. I love you, Alyssa. I have always loved you. You are the only good, pure thing I have ever had." I looked down at the weeping, trembling man kneeling pathetically at my feet. I did not feel a single flicker of compassion. I did not feel anger or resentment, or even a lingering sense of betrayal. I felt absolute, pure, zero emotion. The profound emptiness in my chest was the ultimate confirmation that my emotional attachment to this man had been entirely, permanently severed. He was attempting to weaponize his own supposed victimhood to manipulate me into staying. He wanted me to believe he was just a helpless, innocent bystander caught in the gravitational pull of his father's corruption. I slowly reached down and firmly detached his shaking hands from the fabric of my slacks. I simply removed his grip with cold, clinical precision. I took a half step backward, forcing him to look up at me from his pathetic position on the floor. "You are not a victim, Brandon," I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. "You are a grown man who made calculated, deliberate decisions every single day to lie to my face and steal from our shared future. You knew exactly what they did. You want to blame your toxic upbringing for your moral cowardice." I continued, looking directly into his terrified, weeping eyes. "But nobody forced you to log into our banking portal this morning. Nobody forced you to attempt a fraudulent wire transfer to cover up a felony. You chose to protect criminals at the expense of your own wife. Enablers are just accomplices without the courage to pull the trigger themselves." Brandon let out an agonizing, strangled gasp as the brutal, unyielding truth of my words hit him squarely in the chest. He raised his hands, reaching for me one last desperate time, but his arms fell uselessly back to his sides. He finally understood that there was absolutely no manipulation tactic, no tearful apology, and no pathetic excuse that could ever rebuild the bridge he had so willingly burned to the ground. I turned my body entirely away from him, severing our connection permanently. I stepped right past him. The federal agents were actively securing the grand foyer, moving quickly past the shattered front entrance. I navigated smoothly through the chaotic scene, feeling completely detached from the profound destruction surrounding me. I reached the threshold of the house, stepping carefully over the splintered, jagged remains. I walked out the front door today. I stepped over the splintered remains of the custom mahogany front door and walked out onto the wide stone porch. The crisp, freezing winter air hit my face, instantly clearing my lungs of the heavy, toxic atmosphere that had suffocated me inside that house. The contrast between the absolute chaos unfolding behind me and the peaceful quiet of the suburban morning in front of me was incredibly striking. Frost coated the manicured lawns of the wealthy gated community, glittering under the rising sun like a blanket of tiny crushed diamonds. Several federal tactical vehicles were parked haphazardly across the expansive gravel driveway, their red and blue emergency lights still silently rotating, casting rhythmic flashes across the manicured landscaping. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling the tight, heavy knot that had lived in my chest for the past 5 years completely unravel and dissolve into nothing. Down at the far end of the long, sweeping driveway, safely away from the immediate perimeter of the federal raid, Jamal was standing next to his large, dark SUV. He had already managed to get his 2 young children out of the house before the tactical breaching team arrived, shielding them from the traumatic sight of their grandfather and mother being handcuffed and dragged away by armed agents. I watched as he carefully and gently strapped his youngest daughter into her car seat, making sure she was warm and secure. He closed the heavy rear door of the vehicle with a solid, comforting thud, ensuring his children were completely safe inside their protected bubble. Jamal paused, leaning against the side of his car, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking back toward the massive, sprawling estate that had caused him so much profound, unnecessary pain. His dark eyes scanned the chaotic scene and eventually found me standing alone on the stone front porch. We looked at each other across the distance of the gravel driveway. There were no words exchanged between us because absolutely no words were needed. We were the only 2 outsiders who had ever been foolish enough to try and love the deeply broken people inside that corrupt family. We had both endured years of their psychological manipulation, their subtle insults, and their relentless financial exploitation. And today, we were the only 2 people walking away from this absolute catastrophe completely unscathed. Jamal straightened his posture and looked directly into my eyes. He gave me a slow, firm, deeply respectful nod. It was the silent acknowledgement of a fellow survivor. I returned the nod with equal respect, recognizing the immense strength it took for him to finally walk away and protect his children. He opened his driver's side door, climbed into his vehicle, and drove away, leaving the nightmare behind him forever. I turned my attention toward my own car, parked neatly on the opposite side of the circular driveway. It was a sleek, powerful luxury sedan that I had purchased entirely on my own just last year. Brandon had tried to convince me to put the vehicle in his name, claiming it would somehow be better for our joint insurance rates, but I had firmly refused. I paid the full down payment with my own hard-earned annual bonus and secured the financing solely under my own pristine credit score. As I walked toward the car, my heels crunching softly against the cold, loose gravel, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This beautiful machine was not a gift from a wealthy, corrupt patriarch. It was not purchased with stolen funds or hidden offshore accounts. It was the direct physical manifestation of my own brilliant mind, my relentless work ethic, and my absolute unyielding dedication to my own independence. I unlocked the car with my key fob and pulled the heavy door open, sliding smoothly into the premium leather driver's seat. The interior of the car was freezing, but I did not care. I sat there for a brief moment, gripping the smooth leather steering wheel, and simply allowed myself to feel the immense weight of the victory. I had not resorted to screaming matches or physical violence or pathetic petty insults. I simply used my professional expertise to expose their own massive criminal vulnerabilities, and then I stepped back to let them destroy themselves. It was perfectly legal, incredibly precise, and absolutely devastating. Through the open door of my car, I could still hear the frantic, chaotic sounds echoing from the inside of the massive house. I could hear Diane wailing in the foyer, mourning the sudden violent loss of her multi-million-dollar wealthy lifestyle. I could hear the heavy combat boots of the federal agents stomping across the hardwood floors as they aggressively boxed up decades of highly sensitive financial crimes. I could hear Brandon shouting my name one last desperate time, begging me to come back and save him from the absolute wreckage of his own cowardly, pathetic choices. I reached down and pushed the ignition button. The powerful engine roared to life, instantly filling the quiet cabin with a low, steady, comforting hum. I reached over to the driver's side door panel and pressed my finger firmly against the window control switch. The thick tinted glass smoothly and silently rolled up, sealing completely tight against the frame. The heavy soundproof insulation of my luxury car instantly blocked out every single sound coming from the outside world. The frantic screams, the crying, the desperate pleas for help, they all vanished completely, leaving me in a state of perfect absolute silence. The story of Alyssa serves as a powerful reminder that true security and self-worth can never be outsourced to a spouse or a supposedly affluent family. The critical lesson here is the absolute necessity of maintaining your financial and emotional independence. When manipulation masquerades as family loyalty, passive enablers become just as dangerous as the actual perpetrators. Alyssa's triumph wasn't just about outsmarting criminals. It was about recognizing her inherent value and refusing to be a sacrificial lamb to protect a corrupt facade. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect yourself from a toxic family? Share your story in the comments below.